All right, Joe. So this is a good essay. I'm going to walk you through it and explain what's gone on and what bits you could do to improve and which ones were particularly good. First of all, is the idea that you need to perhaps not ask questions within the introduction, instead just go straight on to answering them. A bit of a literacy error here in terms of no capital W. A system of ideas developed by Freud that explains personality and behaviour in terms of unconscious wishes and conflicts, emphasis on sexuality, and then you go through explaining what psychoanalysis essentially was, including the Oedipus complex. Don't forget that there is also the Electra complex, which is the female version of that, and you go on to then explain these quite clearly. Make sure you write numbers in full, not in digits, in essays as well. You explain here that psychoanalytic theory has decreased in influence, but you don't sort of say in what time scale or for any reason. It's not necessarily an essay about psychoanalysis, but if you're going to make a statement like that, try and be more specific. So then you go on to say the unconscious is important when determining our behaviour. A lot of our desires, motivations and conflicts are below the level of our consciousness. As people, we are all driven by animalistic and intrinsic instinctual urges, especially lust and aggression. Good. Couple of literacy errors again. You're forgetting capital letters. I know you're doing this on a Google Docs, but you still need to proofread it and actively spell check your work. Gatsby, on the other hand, has always been unhappy about his past life being lower class due to his desire to win Daisy back. Capital D there for Daisy. He becomes a bootlegger, which drastically increases his wealth, which in his mind is the only way he can win her back. Good. You wouldn't need to go into any more detail than you have there in terms of recounting the plot, because otherwise it becomes too descriptive, but that's a good amount there. Again, capital letter there at the beginning for the structure of our minds is split into the id, the ego, and the superego. It's good that you've specified what these parts mean. Hopefully you don't do that later on in the essay, because there wouldn't be a need to repeat it. We see this structure reflect through Gatsby as the drive he has for Daisy. His id makes him want to reinvent his image to become more respectable upper-class man. Ego develops a conflicting personality. Superego. Good, yes. Nick is mainly acting as Gatsby's superego. Spag issue there in terms of just a typo. Interesting point that Nick is his superego. I hadn't thought of that, but it certainly makes sense with the idea that Nick is the person trying to impose kind of a moral order on Gatsby and rein in Gatsby's desires, possibly. Freudian theory is what comes into play when realising that Gatsby is psychologically troubled. How do you mean psychologically troubled? In what sense? Perhaps you go on to explain. Here the id is important and is the key factor in determining Gatsby's behaviour. All of his desires, motivations and conflicts are below the level of consciousness, and his biological instincts are surfaced. What biological instincts specifically are you talking about? Be a little bit more specific. I would also point out that you haven't, up until now, included any quotations from the novel. It is always crucial to include quotations from the novel, because otherwise you're not demonstrating that you understand it and can reference it specifically. Freud believed that people are driven by animalistic instinctual urges, particularly lust and aggression. Bit of repetition, you mentioned that up here, I think, somewhere as well. The being feels that these needs must be met, even if they are not always realistic or even possible. Who are you quoting there? I would guess it's Freud himself, or some website where there is a summary of Freud. You need to cite who has said that. Gatsby's choices in his life, that he is driven by lust and aggression like an animal with primitive instincts, that lives for survival and instant gratification. His choices to live a criminal life was driven by his hatred of his original life, poverty, and the fact that his first love, Daisy, left him when he was poor. Note she was Daisy Fay then, not Daisy Buchanan. Watch that out. The thought of instant gratification given by his id brought Gatsby to the life he chose to pursue.